using components bought from Camping World. And there were questions about its safety rating.
It just seemed a bit shoddy.
OceanGate shouldn't have been doing what it was doing.
This is really focused on one thing, and that's the pressure vessel, and making sure that that component, which is clearly the most critical component of the sub, is safe.
But 5 Titanic tourists paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to descend 12,500 feet in the Titan submarine. Now the remains of the sub have been found, and questions are being asked by experts who raise safety concerns about the OceanGate vessel were apparently ignored. One of the engineers was fired after voicing his concerns. One man refused to ride the sub after seeing how it was built, and one man who actually did ride it described his voyage to a newspaper as suicide. These are all the potential concerns that could have led to disaster. OceanGate, the company which owned the sub, said on its website that it was a mixture of bespoke engineering and off-the-shelf parts. They said this made the sub easy to fix, but the decision to use these components has now been called into question. David Pogue, a reporter who took a ride on the sub last year, reported it used lighting and handles bought from Camping World, and rusted scaffolding was used as ballast.
You get there and then you start seeing this stuff, and now your mood crashes and you get a little worried. Like, is this the level of polish and sophistication we're talking about?
A previous passenger described how to release the ballast. Passengers all had to move to one side of the vessel. Mr. Pogue described the craft as jerry-rigged, MacGyvered, and said a lot of the parts were less sophisticated than he expected, like the knockoff PlayStation controller used for steering. When Mr. Pogue challenged owner Stockton Rush over this, the OceanGate CEO is said to have hit back, saying the pressurized container where the passengers sit was state-of-the-art. Made of carbon fiber and titanium, he claimed that NASA, Boeing, and Washington University had assisted in the design. Mr. Rush said that all of the other components could fail and the sub would still be safe. He did admit on the Unsung Science podcast that his biggest fear was getting stuck and being unable to surface. Fears had been raised about the communications at least once before, after Titan went missing while Mr. Pogue was taking his voyage. The sub stopped responding to its support ship, got lost, was unable to find the Titanic wreck, and then went missing for 5 hours afterwards. Mr. Pogue said that there was talk at the time of adding an emergency beacon to the sub, but it seems this didn't happen. The sub is constantly plagued by mechanical problems, he added in TV interviews after the tragedy. The Titan operated in international waters, meaning it was outside the remit of government agencies. Mr. Pogue had to sign a waiver before getting on board, which said that the craft was experimental and had not been approved by any regulator. OceanGate said the sub could not be classified because it used technology that was so new it fell outside existing industry paradigms. Getting certification for the sub, the company said, would be a multi-year process that was unnecessarily slow because of a lack of pre-existing standards. OceanGate said the approval process was anathema to rapid innovation. By itself, the company argued, classification is not sufficient to ensure safety. CEO Stockton Rush was skeptical of safety standards, telling the Smithsonian that laws governing undersea craft needlessly prioritized passenger safety over innovation. Titan was not his first sub made in this fashion, but it was the first designed to handle tourists. As well as exploring the Titanic, he planned to venture to thermal vents and undersea battlegrounds. Mr. Rush described the submarine industry as obscenely saying there hadn't been an accident in 35 years. But the industry also hasn't grown or innovated because of all the regulations, he added. If you want to be safe, he told CBS News just last year, don't get out of bed. While Mr. Rush may have dismissed the danger in what he was doing, others did not, and raised concerns for years before Titan disappeared. David Lockridge, who was hired by Mr. Rush to work on the sub, was embroiled in a lawsuit with OceanGate in 2018 after being sacked. The company accused the former Royal Navy Marine engineer of trying to get fired after he penned a report criticizing their safety standards. According to court documents, Mr. Lockridge had raised concerns over the integrity of the sub's hull, its viewing window, which was only certified to 4,000 feet, not the 13,000 feet it would be diving to, and flammable materials on board. He had urged OceanGate to get the craft certified and warned they would be otherwise subjecting passengers to extreme danger. And he was not the only one. A letter sent to Mr. Rush from leaders in the submersible industry around the same time warned that his experimental approach was risking accidents that could be catastrophic.
There are only 10 vehicles in the whole world that can go 4,000 meters or deeper, and all of them are certified except the Titan.
Chris Brown was one of OceanGate's early customers and bought a ticket for £80,000 after having a few beers with a friend who knew about it. But when Brown began asking questions, he quickly decided the voyage wasn't worth the risk.
Parts of the submarine that I'd seen in the testing in the Bahamas just seemed a bit shoddy. They're using industrial piping for ballast. They're using an Xbox controller for the steering. The strip lightings, something you get at a DIY shop.
The sub was beset by delays and technical issues, and when Mr. Brown finally got to inspect it, he came away with the impression that designers had been cutting corners.
But what really did it for me was they flatly refused to get any form of certification.
Arthur Lobel, a German man who did take a voyage on the Titan, described it to build as a suicide mission and said he was lucky to survive. At first, Lobel said, the submersible didn't work. Then the dive had to be abandoned when a part fell off and was reattached with zip ties. And finally, it was hit by electrical issues.
I was nervous that we have to go back because we got some problems like in the other dives with the battery systems.
Even Paul-Henri Nargolet, perhaps the world's most experienced Titanic explorer, had doubts. In an interview with media in his home country of France, he admitted that he did not trust the submersible's composite material design.
Continuing tonight, the U.S. Navy is also sending crews and special lifting equipment to help if the missing craft can be found. The challenges are enormous, and the situation is becoming more desperate by the hour.
Rescuers are racing against the clock and a dwindling oxygen supply to find the submersible lost at sea.
This operation is our top priority.
This afternoon, U.S. Coast Guard officials in Boston updated the public on what they called an incredibly complex operation.
Since Sunday, the Coast Guard has coordinated search efforts with the U.S. and Canadian Coast Guard, Air National Guard aircraft, and the Polar Prince, which have searched a combined 7,600 square miles, an area larger than the state of Connecticut. To date, those search efforts have not yielded any results.
For the 5 passengers on board, time is of the essence.
We know there's about 40 hours of breathable air left based on that initial report.
Owned by Washington State-based OceanGate Expeditions, the vessel, known as the Titan, takes passengers deep into the sea to view wreckage of the Titanic, all for about $250,000 a person. The submersible began its descent Sunday morning near where the Titanic went down, about 400 nautical miles south of St. John's, Newfoundland. All contact was lost about an hour and 45 minutes after it began its dive. No one at the surface knows why. The day before, one of the passengers, British billionaire Hamish Harding, said this year brought, quote, the worst winter in Newfoundland in 40 years, but, quote, a weather window had just opened up to attempt a dive, both on the surface and below. The Titanic's wreckage rests about 12,500 feet, or more than 2 miles underwater. That's equivalent to 10 Empire State Buildings stacked on top of each other, more than twice the depth of the Grand Canyon. Those on board the vessel include Harding, chairman of the company Action Aviation. Also aboard the vessel is OceanGate founder and CEO Stockton Rush. Shahzada Dawood, a British-Pakistani executive at one of Pakistan's largest conglomerates, and his son Suleiman. And French explorer Paul-Henri Nargeolet, director of the company that owns the rights to the Titanic's wreckage. Rescuers today say their focus is on locating the vessel. Though if found, it's unclear how or if they could retrieve it.
We have a group of our nation's best experts in the Unified Command, and if we get to that point, those experts will be looking at what the next course of action is.
On the search and how a possible rescue could be carried out, I'm joined by retired U.S. Navy submarine captain David Marquet. Captain Marquet, welcome. You heard what the rescuers are up against there. If that vessel hasn't surfaced somehow and is still underwater, how are they carrying out a search like this? What are they looking for and what are they doing?
There's two components to the search. First, there's the search on the surface of the water. This can happen. You can cover wide areas with airplanes that fly relatively quickly and they have radars, and it's getting dark, but during the daytime you also use your eyeballs, and so they can cover a wide area. I'm pretty confident if that ship were at the surface, it would have been found by now. Underwater at the depths where the Titanic is, 2.5 miles down, it's a totally different story. First of all, you hope that if they were in there and they were capable, they would be making noises. They would be using pingers or the underwater telephone or just simply banging on the hull of the submarine. And those sounds would be picked up by the sonar buoys, which are being dropped, and the other ships that are listening. We're not hearing that either. So now I'm fearful that something catastrophic has happened, because when there's an abrupt termination of communications like that, that would signal multiple systems going down at the same time, or one catastrophic failure which affected the entire vessel.
Captain Marquet, if they even located the vessel, what then? What can they do? Is there a way to tow it to the surface to rescue people underwater?
Yeah, there's no way to rescue people underwater on this type of a ship. What you need to do that is you need two ships with the same type of mating surface that they would then come together. And this ship, the hatch is bolted on from the outside. It doesn't have that kind of a mating surface. And the rescue ships that had those kind of mating surfaces have been retired and don't go that deep anyway. So that's not the way to do it. We need to get that ship up to the surface. You either need to use lifting equipment, which somehow comes under, like a sled that would come under it and then inflate and go up, but that's got to be placed there by something, or we drop a 2-mile cable with a hook on it, and then we have a ROV down low, which finds the submarine, gets it hooked, and then we can reel it up to the surface. Again, this takes time because we need to get that equipment also, first of all, to Newfoundland, and then on a ship and out to the wreck of the Titanic, which is 400 miles away.
You may have seen there's some new reporting today that leaders in this submersibles industry back in 2018 sent a letter to the CEO, who was the pilot of this vessel, expressing concerns that he wasn't sticking to their standards and guidelines of the industry and warning of a catastrophic potential ahead. Does that surprise you?
Yeah, that's reported in the New York Times. That's a remarkable letter. And we see this tug with innovation, where innovation might get ahead of regulation and the ability, the governing laws in terms of how those particular vessels or that particular area it should operate. and then it goes back and forth. And I admire the spirit of innovation and pushing the boundaries and not wanting to be fettered by rules that are written in the industrial age. But at the same time, we have people's lives here. And in the United States Navy, we take great care of our submarines. They're designed brilliantly with multiple redundancies. If we need one pump, we put in two. If we need two pumps, we put in three. We do operate through operational procedures. For example, if we haven't used the submarine in a while, we go to sea. Even before we go to sea, we're going to test everything at the dock. Then we go to sea in shallow water, submerge just a little bit, run around with flashlights, check everything. It's a very deliberate, slow, methodical process. And it's hard for me to see how a commercial company is going to have as many resources as we would apply to keeping our submarines safe at sea. It's a very, very harsh environment. The pressure is 380 times atmospheric pressure.